welcome to the stage Independent Spirit Award nominee, SAG Award nominee, and Academy Award nominee Lily Gladstone. It's a lovely welcome. Lily, I want to start. I know that your talent as a performer was recognized at a very early age in childhood by your family and your community, and that took you to college, to a BFA in performance arts, and then theatre. So I want to start. I know you've played in Miss Julie and Manna-Hata, the Miracle Worker. You've performed at the Oregon Shakespeare, with the Oregon Shakespeare Company and Yale Rep. And I want to ask, what were the lessons you learned after your formal training in the theatre?
I mean, formal training in the classroom really helps you define process that gets you through a long run. And that's also actually been incredibly beneficial to have processes that help with different characters, particularly different physicalities. Because I think some characters demand more being built from the outside in. Inside out is a difficult thing to sustain, but it can also be very intriguing for camera work. So it kind of gives you a really nice toolbox, but nothing really prepares you for the element of the audience. And you know, any actor who's been in a rehearsal process for a long time, by the time you're ready to open, you're so hungry to have an audience. Getting the quiet, nonverbal feedbacks, the temperature in the room. A lot of times it will depend, you know, the audience is the spice, it's the salt. I mean, I did a run of a play in New York with a new group, Good for Otto by David Rabe, and you could almost tell in the first 5 minutes if it was going to be a comedy or a drama that night, based upon how the audience took the first few beats. Same writing, same blocking, same basic, you know, energy that we were bringing each night when we showed up on stage, but then when you're greeted by that. And now, like, I think in film, you know, it's a conversation we had in undergrad a lot. It's a conversation you have with other artists a lot. At what point do you surrender the work to your audience? And it takes a lot longer with film. Your first audience is, for me, I get very close with the camera department, because a lot of times, even before your director can come to you and deliver notes or really kind of help you gauge how the scene went, you feel it from camera first. So that's, crew is largely your first audience, which is very different because they can't laugh when something's funny, they can't like audibly gasp when something's shocking. It's different than a theater audience, but you definitely kind of feel, and in that way it almost feels more like a dance. When the scene's really working, it's not just what's happening in front of the camera, it's like how you're moving. So yeah, I think training is very useful to pack your knapsack, but then, you know, you have to constantly unpack it, decide how much of what you bring to each time you step on stage, each time you're on set.
So starting with your career in film and television, I think perhaps one of the first films, if not the first film you made, was a short with the almost irresistible Tatanka Means. And I think it's interesting that in your career, you are such a fully rounded artist and actress that you also cast several shorts. So what did you learn about the auditioning process from casting?
Every actor in this room, I suggest at some point jump on the other side of the table. It's having the chance to work in casting. It's really fun because you find that you're rooting for people maybe the same way or almost more sometimes than you root for yourself to get a role. it feels really good when you have an instinct about somebody and what they can bring to a character, and then they completely surprise you. And something about sitting on the other side of casting is we are always quietly rooting for every single actor to be the one. You know, it's like there's nobody, maybe it's my own process, but generally I just feel this way in conversations with other casting directors. Every time it's like you want every single performer to just, you know, excel. There's nobody sitting on the other side of the table like doing a, you know, oh, how many stumbles, how many pauses, how many whatever. It also taught me that it's very easy to spot, and it's something that you kind of have to learn to resist as an actor, especially in the era of self-tape, when you can do as many takes as you want to. You can work it and polish it and make it perfect. When you see the same perfect polished audition with the same beats over and over again, the person who comes in almost just throwing it off the shoulder. You know, I love that Coleman Domingo recently was talking about his casting process with, I believe, Fear the Walking Dead, and how he just let it go completely in his audition, and it was an immediate offer after that. So that was, that whole process taught me that there's not really a formula, it's what you make of it as a performer. And each performer has an incredibly unique, diverse set of skills, instincts, pacing, whatever. Just they have a different spice to add to the character. So it was really refreshing to spend some time on the other side of the lens, or not the other side of the lens, the other side of the table, because it changes how you want to approach things. It's almost like the looser hand and the more fun you have with it, even if it's not perfect. It's a lot of times you're surprising people with what you have to bring to it. So.
And that is a wonderful thing to aspire to. I think for all of the Film Independent members in the audience, I want to make sure that everybody knows that you hosted a crash course in film production, which is so comprehensive. It's 15 episodes. I think it's intended for an audience of high schoolers, but we'll all learn something from it. It's free online, and I think this also speaks to you as a teaching artist, because you don't see many actresses explaining the whole process of pitching and pre-production and cameras as thoughtfully and simply as you did in that series.
Thank you. I love Crash Course. If you're unfamiliar, it's an educational YouTube channel. Also, it has SciShow. There's a ton of channels. When I was graduating college in Missoula, Montana, it was the same year that Hank Green had moved to town and started this media conglomerate that became Crash Course and Vlog Brothers. He's one half of Vlog Brothers. So everybody that I had been making student films with at the University of Montana, because that's where I found myself working more, was not necessarily in productions with my own department, but getting asked to be in people's student films. So by the time I graduated, I had a full reel in all of these relationships with filmmakers. The first kind of leading role that I had was with somebody who became a SciShow producer. Her name is Caitlin Hoffmeister. She's also the one who introduced me to the films of Kelly Reichardt. When we were making her senior thesis film, it was called Sea Glass. Very internal, like coming of age, kind of, you know, finding your place post-graduate and in a small little seaside town. But I asked her for film recommendations for tone, and she told me to watch Wendy and Lucy. So that was my introduction to Kelly as a filmmaker. And then later, when she was producing at SciShow, another one of my directors from undergrad, Nick Jenkins, had cast me as a grad student in his senior thesis film. So his students had been, you know, one of their class assignments was editing the footage he shot on set with us over and over. So there was just, every year I'd go to the grocery store and whoever was like checking me, I'd be like, oh, hey, I'm in Nick Jenkins' class. I was just editing your face. So Nick was the one who directed those Crash Course episodes. Caitlin and Nick pitched me to Hank to host that year, because that was the year Certain Women had come out. And the scripts that they had written were so close to a lot of the curriculum that I was picking up secondhand, I guess, by being a student actor in student films. And these students were learning just this real process of making it. And that was cool. At University of Montana, it was the first wave of students in media arts that were learning how to make it, not just film theory, because there was a lot of film theory embedded in it, of course, watching, writing, responding, it being, fulfilling the literature credits for undergrad. But when Crash Course rolled around, I really believe in just the general ethic of free public education. The script, it's written for at least older high school and up. There's some humorous elements in it, but you're right. The tone that I specifically chose to take in hosting it was to, juniors, seniors in high school that are thinking they want to be filmmakers and are just hungry to maybe go to film school. And really that year I was also working as a programmer for the Roxy Theater, where I know Marshall Granger, who edited this beautiful retrospective. And that year we were putting together classes to kind of teach people just the nitty-gritty of how to be on set. As there were more films coming to Montana, and we were going to be more likely to get more films wanting to shoot with us if we had local crew. So it was all right, how do we transfer skills, from whatever your trade may be, how do you transfer that to film set language? So I'd already been kind of building this curriculum, and then I was asking SciShow if we could bring people on set there so they could just have a little crash course in being on set. So that also led to hosting it. So yeah, it was, I think it was instilled in me by my theater education. We had to take lighting, we had to take sound, we had to take stage makeup, costumes, all of it, directing, writing. Our education in undergrad for theater was so well-rounded because the theory is the more you know about all of the jobs peripheral to what you really want to do, the better you'll be when you are hired. And I feel it really, as an actress on set, very strongly when I have a good sense of what's going on with camera. It's, in one way, helps you depersonalize when a take is not working. You can just lean into and trust, okay, if it feels right, if it feels wrong. You have your director that you're working with, but if there's multiple takes, sometimes it's not you at all. Sometimes focus didn't land the right way. Sometimes there's a lens flare that they don't want, or a lens flare that they do want that they didn't get. All of these little things. So I feel like Crash Course was a really nice way to demystify making films for people, help kids and, postgraduates who have a passion for it, but maybe are wondering if they want to commit four years of their life to a study, or if they want to just dive in and learn by doing it.
Well, it's a generosity of spirit to lift all boats. And I want to talk about, your foray into television with Room 104, because you talked about relationships, and I think relationships are an interesting theme in your career so far. And I always thought that everybody in Room 104 was just a friend of the Duplass brothers. Is that true?
No, I actually just maybe became professionally friends, even though I still have never met them. But we're co-EPing a project together now. So, hi Jay, hi Mark. Room 104, I actually am the voice of the 911 operator in the pilot, which was directed by Sarah Adina Smith. I had just done a film, small part with her in her film Buster and Smell Heart that she had shot in Montana, and it was the year that Certain Women had shot but hadn't come out yet. So I was actually on a plane landing for, I believe, some press thing to go along with the release of the film. And when I touched down and took my plane off airplane mode, I had a text from Sarah, "Are you in LA?" Yes, I just landed this second. Can you get to this sound booth in the next 2 hours? I've got, it's a day of pay. I'm yeah, great, perfect. So I just got off the plane and, instead of going to my couch that I was crashing, asked the lift to go to the sound studio, walked in, signed my paperwork, put it on there. So that got me in Room 104 first, and I think maybe that, I don't know if that had anything to do with coming back later. From my understanding, Janae Lamarck, who directed and co-wrote the episode with her partner and husband, Julian Voss. They love certain women. And that one just came in as an offer about a week before we shot, I think. Yeah, and that was for me, that was kind of my first real glimpse, being a co-lead of an episode, churning it out, only having 2 days to shoot it, with a weekend in between. So shooting half of it and sustaining it over the weekend, coming back on Monday to get the other half of it. Yeah, just some of my favorite writing that I've ever done, honestly.
Staying with TV before we get to certain women. Billions, I think, is so fascinating because talking about keeping the thread going, season 3, 5, 7, and I'm sure you had no idea when you started that you would end up as Paul Giamatti's mother-in-law to start with. And also just interesting because big budget television. So what did you pick up during that process?
Other than enough of a paycheck to sustain myself for a while. I loved working with Jeffrey. I loved working with Paul, Maggie, that whole family. I mean, Brian and David really created an incredible show, and they were so hands-on with it. My first scene, really my character in that show started out as like the punchline of a joke. But of course, the way that they love to circumvent things or, surprise their audience, circumvent trope. And of course, they just decide that Senior actually falls in love with this one. It's, not just his tucked away baby mama up on the reservation. But yeah, it's really sweet, the development of Roxanne, which is a name I chose for that character. The scene work, it was always small, because it was a very small, just like guest spot appearance, but every single time you're just greeted, not like as a day player, anybody's gonna forget, like the first time I was on set, Paul had a real conversation with me, Jeffrey and I stayed in touch and have been emailing, and but Paul, in our first meeting, actually hung out with me a little bit to get to know me, and the scene was great. And then I figured that was probably a one and done. Like I said, it felt like a punchline of a joke. So when they called me back again, it's like, oh, that's a surprise. By the time I got back to set, both Jeffrey and Paul had watched Certain Women. They took the time to do that for a day player. And, the role, even though it was small, it was significant. It's a really warm, welcoming family, and it's kind of funny. I was supposed to go back for more episodes that season, but then COVID happened. I was already on the West Coast, and things were starting to lock down, so they had to really quickly wrap up the season before the mid-season break for season 5, I believe. And then the next season, I was supposed to be a lot more recurring, as far as I understand, but Marty had grabbed me. I'd gotten cast in Killers of the Flower Moon, and of course David sent this beautiful letter, and he was so happy for me. Jeffrey sent a beautiful letter, was so happy for me. And then when I watched what would have been, I guess, the episode I would have been in, I noticed that they wrote in a little bit of a potshot joke at Marty. It was a little comment that Senior makes about the length of the Irishman. In the same breath that he's talking about Roxanne and the baby, he also gives a little jab to the Irishman. So I was like, aw, that's sweet.
Staying a little bit longer with TV, Tuca and Bertie, it's cult status, such an amazing cast of comedians, working with Tiffany Haddish and Ali Wong. Also, I'm assuming during COVID, were you audio engineering for yourself? Were you recording in a closet? Was it the first time you did animation?
I think if Quantum Cowboys counts as animation, then no, but that was also acted against a green screen and rotoscoped later. But in a sense, it you have to think about performance in the same way, that it's kind of a mask you're wearing that you have to act through and make sure that you're sending your voice through. It was in a sound studio in Seattle because I was quarantining at home with my family, and yeah, I still in person have never met anybody, except for Ali Wong. I think I ran into her on a carpet. Did I? I can't remember. Maybe I'm just fantasizing that I've met Ali Wong because I love her so much. But yeah, Tuca and Birdie was just a really fun little just spark in the middle of a difficult time for all of us, and questioning what the future was going to be. I was like, oh good, this is a nice COVID-friendly way I can go work and not worry about bringing it home to my grandma and my dad. And yeah, that was maybe just a couple weeks before we got, we went back to Texas to pick up the last few beats, last few moments of The Unknown Country. And that one was, yeah, it was fun going from like a sound booth and animation to kind of being nervous about going back on set, but for some weird, gift of the film gods, one of our producers was married to an epidemiologist who was studying COVID and actually handed us a COVID protocol on set before there was any COVID protocol for set. Everybody built in the isolation period. We were shooting outside in Big Bend National Park, around Big Bend National Park and a little bit there. I found that we had the exact same film or COVID protocol when I walked back on set for Killers of the Flower Moon 6 months later.
Before we get to Certain Women, Reservation Dogs. I mean, such a saving grace of a television show, so deep and painful and spiritual and funny. And your scenes, you're an auntie again, your scenes with your niece are just such an offering to her, but offering name of an episode. Your advice to her, it's great advice for all of us. Paulina Alexis, what a wonderful actress. Can you tell us about your scene work with Paulina?
It's kind of funny. Paulina was having a really rough day that day. She was, some of your first young love, she was going through a hard time with her boyfriend. I think they were just talking about breaking up. I think they're back together now. But she was she was having a rough morning that morning. And it's funny because I was also the very first episode you meet Hochty. I was so moved by that writing, and every time I read that scene, I would cry. Every time I would work my lines, I would just, So there was this particular weight on getting it right, and I got the script, I think, less than a week before I was on a plane to get there, and it's the whole episode. So I was naturally just kind of nervous about, do I have this embedded in my body enough that I'm going to do justice to this, or am I going to just be swimming for lines the whole time? So I was in my head about it in the morning, and then Sterling comes by my trailer and just like, hey, would you run lines with Paulina a little bit? She's kind of in a funk today. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And then she came in, and I could tell, she was really internal, kind of small. We just kind of worked it a little bit. I visited her with her a little bit, and I didn't pry as to what was going on with her, but I was just there. And I didn't realize until later when she told me how much I'd inspired her. I don't remember exactly what I said. Maybe it was just working the scene and the nature of what the scene was, and then trying to find this relationship of being this mentor. And just running the scene a couple of times, we developed this safety and familiarity with each other. I immediately felt so protective of her. And then it was just one of the greatest scenes. I want to say episode, but it feels like one long scene, essentially. We really got to crack into it. We got to take our time with it. We got to develop it together. And there was just a beautiful little gift that kind of happened when we both realized that, okay, we're both really nervous. I think maybe her knowing that, I'd been at it for a long time, and, she's incredibly talented and has a couple under her belt before Res Dogs, and is still young and still finding her way with it. So I think, just that kind of, and, to me, she's Willie Jack. I remember when I got the script, I'm like, oh, I got a Willie Jack track, that's amazing. So I think there was this mutual admiration and relief that we were both feeling nervous about how we were going to do the scene. We were both dealing with our own things and unpacking them and just kind of spending time together. And then when we came back again the next year to do the season finale and do one scene, which feels like a whole episode, the one that you watched here, it was so immediate because we stayed in touch online. I root for her like she's my niece. We're always so happy to see each other when we do run into each other. And, you know, that was like the season finale. It was just like graduation day. Everybody was feeling really good and like just on the top of their game. I gotta say about that show, it is one of the most well-oiled machines. That set, like, a lot of people learned how to be on set, how to work in their respective departments, how to be a film crew, how to be creatives on film by making that show. Because Sterling brought in, kind of like I was hoping to do in Montana, translating skills, translating artistic impulse into how you are on set, how you create something. And by the end, I mean, anybody out there who's an actor that works in TV, like, we made our day by 4 o'clock. Everybody was going home. It was just like boom, boom, boom. Everybody was kind, everybody was happy, staying out of each other's way, like, knew each other's names. It's like there wasn't this, like, kind of, and it's funny, you know, it's like any natives out there might be like, wow, we actually, like, made time. But it's, we had extra time. It's like nobody was really racing the clock. We just knew we were going to get it, and we were done super early.
All right, back to 2016, Certain Women. You won so many awards, I can't even mention them all, including a nomination for Best Supporting Female from the Indie Spirits. Your, again, relationship with Kelly Reichardt, you have these amazing, who you probably already knew, but you have these amazing scenes with Kristen Stewart. The diner scenes are, you know, each one is like a little masterclass. Did you have rehearsals for each of those scenes, or was it on set and here we go?
Kristen and I got to meet each other and know each other on the back of a horse. I mean, the first day that we met, I grew up kind of around horses. I had like a marginal comfort level being on them, so it was really important to me that my whole process before we even started was every day I want to be on a horse. And the horse that we rode, particularly Remington, is just like a perfect, perfect horse. He was so good. But yeah, Kristen rolled up and like, it was kind of, honestly, my first time really meeting, well, that's not true. I'd done a scene with Benicio del Toro at that point, and that one kind of, you know, like, okay, celebrities are real people. They have pores on their skin. They're like, there, you can touch them. Don't touch them. Kristen doesn't have any pores on her skin. But yeah, I remember being a little bit like, I guess I'm a little bit more method than I think I am. I settle into characters off camera when I'm there, when I'm getting in their routines, when I'm getting in their clothes. Like, part of my audition was going to the YWCA thrift shop and buying Jamie's wardrobe, which actually they pulled and used. Some of the same stuff that I did my audition in, and I handed over to wardrobe. But anyways, yeah, meeting Kristen was just she was so cute. Like, she just was springy and she's like, hey dude, and she like jumped on me and gave me this big hug. I'm like, oh, okay, we're friends, this is good. But yeah, then we rode around to kind of just figure out the exit plan, you know, if Remington got spooked. And like, you know, the ranchers who handled Remington and were like boarding him and training him, Jess was like, I know you'll be fine. At that point, he was confident that I would be able to get Remington, you know, under control and ride him out if I needed to. But he wanted to make sure that Kristen knew how to dismount a horse if she needed, and literally just getting comfortable with sliding off their butt. So we did that a few times, and it was funny when we were visiting, and it was just us riding around. Like, he would let us go, and we would ride up and down the road, and then we were just visiting, kind of like in the scene, getting to know each other that way. And she told me about how, like, she asked if I'd ever gotten thrown from a horse, and I was like, nope. But I also didn't tell her that I don't ride enough to get thrown from an animal. But she was saying at some point she opened up about how nervous she actually was around horses because of some experiences she's had on big sets. Because, I mean, when you watch an animal have an authentic reaction on screen, they're not acting. So, like, you have a horse in a film that's rearing up, there's a reason it's doing that. And Kristen's really a sensitive person. She's an unbelievable artist, I believe, because of how sensitive she is. So she picked up some kind of nervousness around horses that, like, are chronically kind of being, you know, badgered into reacting a certain way, so they're a little bit tense around people. Remington was a therapy horse. Like, his lot in life was working with kids with, like, disability, kids with PTSD, and yeah, they bonded really quickly. But yeah, it was sweet. Our process of getting to know each other was very much kind of what bonds the characters in the film, or bonds one of the characters in the film.
It's so interesting because I thought she was so insensitive. It was hard to watch her eat in the diner.
Oh, she was tired. No, it's, yeah, that was part of the humor of it. I encourage anybody who watches Kelly's films, it's a little like Chekhov. If you watch them as dramas, they feel melodramatic and like you don't latch on. If you stay open to the irony, to the situational little moments that just maybe don't fit, how somebody could be just like breaking down and then they just notice like, how did they get the dog to sit for that painting? You know, those real human moments. Kelly's funny. Like, I remember when First Cow premiered at New York Film Festival, I was sitting in the very back just cracking up, and I think I was annoying a lot of people sitting around me until afterward they figured out who I was there and why I was there. But yeah, I would encourage anybody who watches Kelly's films, if you haven't watched them as comedies, rewatch it as a comedy. But yeah, a lot of the, I think, humor came from, she's on this pace, she has like this routine, and my character is just like hanging on it because she's like the new thing in my life.
I want to move on to Unknown Country, which is nominated for a John Cassavetes Award and is a really unique film. The storytelling is almost unlike anything I've ever seen before. I've seen it described as docudrama. You've also won a Gotham Award for Best Lead Performance. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Were you, I mean, it's interesting also because it feels like a grief pilgrimage. And I know that the filmmakers were friends, or you became friends during the filmmaking process. Explain to me, you were interacting with real people as this story unfolded. How did that come about? How did that work?
Marissa really laid the groundwork because that was her essentially really long commute. Her husband's a paleontologist who was living, his company was based in Dallas partly, but his boss and the dig site was in South Dakota. So the Dallas to Spearfish road journey is something she was very familiar with. She did that for years and years and would just have these moments, these little touch-ins with people along the way and be curious about who they were. So when she and Vanra, our editor and our co-writer, co-producer, they were talking about the next thing they were going to do because they'd done a short film together. And Vanra really encouraged Marissa to start just capturing footage of people, to start recording the radio, the AM radio passing through all these places. So the kind of documentary element, breakout interviews with people that's like are interstitial to the narrative that weaves through it, those were all captured before I ever met Marissa. The idea for the narrative kind of had spun out of this friendship. I mean, Marissa had known, she keeps a really fun, beautiful journal with a lot of crazy like doodles in it that are really beautiful, I think. But she was writing through this idea for a film kind of based around this road trip she took. Some of the thoughts that she was turning over watching like the Midwest with, you know, the rise of the Trump administration and like kind of the shifting culture and like this this divide that was happening, this heightened divide, it felt like, between like the coasts and middle America, and also just not being able to reconcile the noise with what it actually is to meet people in the Midwest, to see how communities form in the Midwest, to be like somebody who's passing through it and at times feeling very embraced, at times feeling very like on edge, young woman on a road trip. And Marissa was describing this idea for a narrative to Lainey, Lainey Bearkiller Shangru, and Marissa had put it into terms something like just kind of the diaspora she was feeling, and feeling so out of place. It's like, this is my country, but I don't really feel like I get it or I belong here. And when Marissa was kind of describing the feel of the film, Lainey was like, oh yeah, that's what it feels like to be Native American here. It's like, this is our country, but what does it look like now? You know, treated like a foreigner in your own land when you leave the reservation. And so Marissa just kind of like, that's interesting, you know, she really embraced that Lainey resonated with that feeling of it. And then Lainey's like, why don't you make the main character Native? And then Marissa was just like, yeah, why not? Why not? And she immediately like kind of went to task on that. And not too long before that conversation she'd had with her, she'd seen certain women and she's like, oh my God, that's actually perfect. Because that's the kind of actor who will be able to accomplish what this film is about. And we didn't really know how successful our collaboration was going to be. And I was nervous as hell before flying to set because there's no script. There's an idea, there's a point A, there's a point B, there's a couple of things that you etch out. There was a character that had been loosely created by the actress who had come in to do test footage so they could kind of raise money for it. And Marissa had been kind of courting me the whole time, and I was doing other things. And so essentially, in making a sizzle reel to kind of attach producers, attach money to it, to kind of show me what she was going for, there was a young actress who at the time was, I think, 19, who you can see now in True Detective Night Country, Isabella LeBlanc, plays Jodie Foster's stepdaughter. She's fantastic, she's beautiful. I'd watched basically the scene at the gas station and a couple of other things, her landing in the hotel, face planting in the bed, or as Isabel performing this character. And I could see immediately when I heard Lainey's voice on the phone, like I could just see the film, the kind of film that I wanted to make. And ultimately, Isabella did stay on as the grandmother. She's in the photo, like all the photos of the grandmother are Isabella. But the big thing there is she didn't have a driver's license. Kind of needed one to shoot a road trip movie. And it was also, she was just young, you know. The journey that Tana goes on is one that you buy somebody in their early 30s doing, less somebody who's 19 or 20 doing. So, yeah, Isabella, in the process of making the sizzle reel, though, because she had gone to the work to kind of create this character to just shoot something, I wanted to honor what she had done. She's Lakota who grew up in Minneapolis, not on her reservation. And I was like, okay, so I will play a Minneapolis Lakota girl who's going back and visiting her family for this wedding. And some of the relationships that Isabella had formed with Lainey shared a few things, Isabella shared a few things that I kept and integrated into the character, but then I found a way to make them me adjacent, because I'm the closest at hand. But just in the imagined scenario that, like, I don't, you know, I grew up on my reservation, I'm close with my family. I do have a significant chunk of my life also spent in an urban location, and I can navigate going back and forth pretty well. So I extracted the idea of like any comfort or familiarity with my family that's from Pine Ridge, and kind of, you know, just vamped from there. But what was funny was everybody in the film, save for me, Ray, who on Quantum Leap you may recognize, plays Isaac in the clip, and Richard Ray Whitman, who plays Grandpa August, we were the three actors in it, the three SAG actors. And then there was another actor in the Dallas part that is SAG as well. But everybody else were subjects, but not really, because they were also buying into the idea that I was one of their family members, or that I was this girl on this road trip. Everybody ended up really improvising and acting. And, you know, give credit to Andrew, our cinematographer, just knowing when the camera's rolling, knowing when people are not putting on their performance yet. There were 2 instances where you could start seeing that just kind of testify to the acting that was happening in it by the non-actors. The first scene where Tana meets her family when the ice is breaking, she just pulls up, oh, come in, sitting, everything's quiet, and Jazzy ends up playing with her, and then they're a happy family. That actually, we had to go back several months later to recapture because all of the footage, we just looked like family too quickly. It's like Lainey and I immediately just had a familiarity. She felt like home. She said the same thing. She's like, you know, my family's from the Blackfeet Reservation, like, you know, High Plains, but not close to Pine Ridge. We knew a lot of people from Pine Ridge. But yeah, there was a familiarity. Like Lainey knew that I was a res girl. And like, so she felt comfortable with me, and then kind of vice versa. I like felt like I knew her family. Her grandparents are kind of film buffs. They were really into the whole thing. So we had to go back several months later because we didn't have that moment of Tana looking awkward or not really looking like she belongs. We had to go act it. And they did a great job. And then the other one, Dale in the gas station, the take that you see in this was, I think, our first pass. It literally was just kind of hanging around, like just waiting to jump in until the opportune moment. And then Andrew just kind of hanging out and then turning the camera on. So it was essentially a little bit of a rehearsal scene. And then the second take is where my coverage is, when it was still that fresh. And then that was kind of it. But then we went back because Dale wanted more coverage, got a little more on him. He started getting more grandiose, more performative. At one point he was trying to drop the title. It's like, good luck in the unknown country. So yeah, it was, people really just bought into the immediacy of the scene. The 2 drunk guys that are talking to her at the skijoring, that's what that's called. If anybody's seen the film Skijoring, the skis on the horse and the jumps. Yeah, those were 2. That was an actor and a comedian that saw us with a camera and kind of struck up conversation. And it was like, hey, we need guys for this scene. He's like, well, I'm an actor. I'm like, great, Dan, jump in. So yeah, it was very much found the whole way. And it was a great exercise for an actor to learn how to be present, to accept the given circumstances, to stay in character with real people who kind of start catching on. Like, it's really remarkable when the parameters are set, when you get used to a camera being around, when you do have filmmakers that are gifted enough that they can stay out of your way so you're not suddenly aware that you're on camera. It's just, they just do it. Yeah, it was thrilling.
It really is exceptional. And then you EP'd as well on Quantum Cowboys. And so from Unknown Country to Quantum Cowboys, do you attract experimental formats? Is that what you're looking for?
I just kind of go on impulse for who do I like? Who am I going to like to work with? Jeff Marslet I had met through Alex Smith in Austin when I was there for the Winter in the Blood premiere in 2013. And Jeff gave me the sweetest compliment as an actor. Like, we were visiting in the lobby afterward. He taught with Alex Smith at UT Austin, and as a filmmaker, his film Mars, starring Mark Duplass, is fantastic, and is the whole reason I was like, yes, I want to do Quantum Cowboys, so look that one up, it's great. But yeah, Jeff and I were visiting for quite a while in the lobby, and then when Alex and I kind of started like talking, when Alex came up and we started talking, then Jeff was like, oh, you're in the movie, I just watched you. Which is a great feeling as an actor when like somebody has just seen your face on screen and then you're having a conversation with them right after the film and they don't immediately recognize you. It's a really good feeling. So Jeff, since then, like, always reminds me of that. He and Marissa have become really, really close friends of mine. They both told me when I was completely convinced that Marty had moved on. They're like, no, he's gonna call. But yeah, Jeff had been trying to work with me on a project for a long time, and I was actually shooting The Unknown Country in Dallas, the scene where Tana tells the whale joke. Our mutual friend Frank Mosley, a fantastic actor, kind of a mainstay for Slam Dance. He came to visit me on set that day, so of course we put him in the scene. And Frank and I were sitting there visiting, and he's like, Jeff's got a script ready, and they're going to start shooting in the next few weeks. He's got a character he wrote for you. I'm like, oh, God, yeah. Yeah, so I called Jeff and got the script, and I was like, this is amazing. I get to be both Han Solo and Obi-Wan Kenobi in one character. This is wonderful. And yeah, it's, I really love Quantum Cowboys for, you know, Jeff himself is an astrophysicist turned filmmaker. So anybody who hasn't seen the film, you can find it. I think it was on Fandor for a minute, but you can stream it. Amazon, yeah, you can stream it on Amazon. And you should. It's fun. You'll immediately want to record it on VHS and make a cover for it and stick it right on your shelf. It's kind of that like 80s cult classic feel. Put it next to Repo Man because Alex Cox is in it. Jeff, as an astrophysicist, like the whole supposition or the preposition, the thesis of the film kind of got proven by the most recent Nobel Prize winners for astrophysicists. It disproved local reality, which is Einstein's operational theory. Basically, something doesn't actually happen unless it's observed and recorded. It's the way that particles move, and a reaction here, you know, quantum entanglement causes one here, but that reaction doesn't actually occur if there's not something keeping record of it. So it's wild, but that's the whole premise of the film. And what I loved about Jeff, who spent a lot of time in the Southwest, has a lot of close friends who are Tana Autumn, conversations with Native people, everything in this, you know, the proven physics of astrophysics, of quantum reality, are kind of embedded in an indigenous worldview, with particularly in how the land records record of things, about time, the way that time moves, this general sense of multiple stories supporting one another rather than negating one another, even if they're contradictory. So I wanted to come on as an EP because Jeff was bringing indigenous characters into every aspect of the film, whether or not we were like explicitly playing an indigenous person in this conversation about colonization, or a classic Western trope where Gary Farmer is in it and is kind of a Time Lord. He's the one who drops like the whole thesis of the film to Kiowa Gordon's character, who's kind of the fop in it. It's like we got to all be there in all our glory, making this really fun, very like cult classic-y feeling film, and having big heady conversations in a very accessible, fun way. I mean, when you watch it, you're not going to understand the film, but you can't really understand quantum mechanics. It's what I loved about it was this idea, we're so steeped in multiverse stories right now, but the science behind it is not really caught up to a lot of the films that we're watching. It's you have to remove time as an element for all of these multiple universes, the way that we see them in films, to exist, and that was a device we used too. But when I break down the idea of multiverse, it's really as simple as breaking down the word. It's multiple stories. It's and that's the American West. That's what Jeff's whole thing with this film. He wanted to deconstruct the West as we know it in the Western, which, as he puts it, is, you know, like American white men making, you know, shooting in Italy, casting Spanish actors, telling us what the American West is, you know, and it's always been an incredibly diverse place. It's been shaped by so many more people than the Western tells us, and still is. So this idea of these competing storylines, really, like, that exists in an indigenous oral tradition, is like you'll have the same story told a multitude of different ways, and they'll contradict each other, but they all kind of make the shape of what the whole story itself is. So I felt like Jeff was making something that afforded a lot of room for conversations that I wanted to have about how are we telling Westerns now.
The way we shape stories, and also I think the way your career seems to be shaping up, with these relationships, it seems you're collecting filmmakers, you're collecting a new community of filmmakers, and you often, Kelly you've done 2 films with, and then Erica Tremblay, Alex and Andrew Smith, again, 2 films. Erica, we saw a little lovely clip from Little Chief. And then you've gone on to make Fancy Dance with her, which audiences will see on Apple soon, but has already blazed a trail at the film festival circuit. And again, you play another great auntie, Jax Goodiron, with another really talented, beautiful young girl, Isabel DeRoy Olsen. And we see in Lily such a deep emotional well in this character as she looks for her sister, her missing, this theme about missing women looking for her sister. And there are just so many scenes which cause anguish to the audience, frankly, to watch. But I wonder if you can just dissect for us a little bit the scene sort of from the gas station to the cornfield. I don't want to ruin anything for everybody, but it's just so spectacular.
Yeah, those of you who haven't seen it, it is the big kind of turning point in the film. There's several. It's one that I think we wrestled over how to execute and how to resolve, but it ultimately was driving toward, and I'll reference another film, like the Thelma and Louise. We needed something to incite the sort of driving toward the cliff moment. Another film that I compare it to a lot is Paper Moon. I mean, wed those 2 stories together and make it about, a native auntie and her niece, and that's what a Fancy Dance is. But I think Erica had spoken about how she had always known what the end was going to be, the final moments of it, which is just this untouched, maybe it's the last moment, but this moment of real love and connection and support between this aunt and her niece after this incredible tragedy, after this incredible journey and lots of hardships. And yeah, it all kind of came together to illustrate, we didn't want to have perfect heroes. I think that happens a lot when you have films about non-white characters who come from communities that are historically disenfranchised, this model minority thing, and we didn't have interest in that. Jax had, walking in, like she's, first scene, they're stealing a car to sell, just to kind of keep going, but also gathering traditional herbs to sell and to trade and to give to elders in the community for like traditional healing. I know that a lot of audiences, when they watch it, talk about, having just issues with, from the get-go, you're buying into a protagonist who's stealing a truck with her auntie, and kind of like, we could have a conversation about like Grand Theft Auto after we talk about land back, It's what's the great theft that happened here? And we have characters that are in an imperfect world that are doing what they need to survive. And we wouldn't give the same sort of hard lens to watching Bonnie and Clyde, to watching Paper Moon, to watching Thelma and Louise. We wanted a world where 2 native actresses could really dive into these characters that you really do fall in love with and you are rooting for. And I think in being able to do that, I think of my character in Reservation Dogs, Hochty. You see who our incarcerated relatives are. You see who our kids who are placed in the system are. You see the families that are broken apart by this. You don't get the face, but you feel and you learn her in the absence of the people that miss her and are looking for her, who these missing, murdered Indigenous women are, you know, and you see the frustration of the system that doesn't do what it's supposed to help us, you know, and you see the system that's kind of made it so that we don't have the inherent sovereignty to do these things ourselves. So it's women like Jack's in Native communities. I think a lot of communities can resonate with this. They're the ones who are holding things together. They're the ones who are doing it because no one else is. So yeah, that end scene, to incite driving toward the cliff, to have this Indigenous Thelma and Louise ending that celebrates matrilineal love was, it's difficult and it's challenging, but it's really, really effective. It's one of the films where every time I just weep watching the end. And I encourage anybody who sees it to sit through the credits as well. It was a really beautiful song, sung by a Cayuga woman. You can hear her kids in the background. It feels like a really beautiful gift and like a really beautiful prayer to leave that narrative and that story with. So if you watch it, stay through the credits and listen to the song.
And that's a point. You are speaking another language yet again, Kyoga, in fancy dance. And it also, you know, speaking about the missing women, it reminded me that you have taught acting classes as violence prevention for the National Women's Indigenous Resource Centre. And I just think what an amazing way to use your skills to, you know, it's these themes that you're talking about, a bigger world, a larger universe, it's all one thing. But it's wonderful that you're actually doing that.
Thank you. That's my roommate in college and my sister. She's Oglala Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Crystal Tubles. She's an activist and, like, as long as I've known her, an organizer for community. You know, somebody not unlike, you know, all of our aunties that just keep us going. But she brought me on because when I was just studying theory and learning about theater of the oppressed in undergrad, Crystal really quickly recognized how, like, well, what you're talking about we could really use. It's like, you know, we can pay you an honorarium to come out and teach a class for kids. And so I went in and just did acting exercises. Theater of the oppressed, I kind of, with my senior thesis, rejiggered a little bit, like looked through a new lens, and it was like theater of decolonization. That can be a thing. So I'd go into communities with middle schoolers particularly and just play games based in TO. And the theory is if you have, you know, actors, we have to have full command of our instruments. So if a person from an oppressed group of people has command of their voice in a creative manner to shape a story in kind of a simulated sense, like a play, the confidence of doing that, the getting it out of yourself with community and examining these things on stage, you can also reimagine your reality, and then you can kind of work to actualize it in the real world. So just playing gameplay with kids, and the kids having a great time. Some of the organizers from National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, who were also very, like, in hand with us making fancy dance, they, you know, their kids were some of my kids, and I got brought back in to do this at conferences with women who, like, coming from, you know, all organizations around the country that are addressing these things that our film is talking about, like our community effort to find and protect our women. And also a big element of it is suicide prevention on reservations. It's like Native kids have the highest rates of it nationally, and it's an epidemic too. So the idea of bringing in silly, fun theater gameplay to just get confident with your voice, to get silly with each other, to just instill this idea that, like, your voice matters. We need it. We need to hear your story. That was the bulk of, I think, my acting calling, especially before it kind of started picking up a little bit more. But yeah, I remember the very last year that I went to do the Fort Robinson run, which is one of the places that I would do these acting and digital storytelling workshops with kids, learning about this history, Northern Cheyenne, and how, you know, they got their land and their reservation. I flew from the Fort Robinson run after running these 400 miles with these kids, this trail that their ancestors made. I got on a plane and flew here to accept the LA Film Critics Award for Supporting Actress for Certain Women. And yeah, so like those two things really overlapped each other, and I was really, really grateful that since then, you know, films like Fancy Dance have brought me back around with National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, that there's a way that my film work, even though it takes me away from working directly in community, which I really love, it's still in service of people who are doing that same work in community.
Which leads us to what's been keeping you busy, winning a Golden Globe last month for performing Molly Burkhart in Killers of the Flower Moon. And before we talk about the movie, we do have another little clip that I'd like us all to watch together before we discuss. It's absolutely gut-wrenching and heart-aching to watch that howl of despair after Rita's death. There's so much trauma and cruelty, and there are so many deaths that you experienced during this story, but perhaps can you fill in for us what it was like to film this scene?
Rita was the last sister that Molly had left at that point, so it was almost unimaginable that she would lose her like that. This is not long after the Tulsa Race Massacre and the bombing of Black Wall Street, so it was in the collective consciousness that maybe we're next. That us being in the basement arose from that thought on the day. It wasn't scripted. There's a line that we added on the day for Vera, Norma Jean, to say, you know, this is just like Tulsa. Because I was sitting there visiting with Leo about it, and that came out. You know, we were talking about how to block it, how to stage it, and initially in the script, it was Ernest coming back in and they're all in the living room. And I was like, that doesn't feel right, that feels too exposed to me. I was like, where would they go if they thought they were being bombed? And then asked, this is a real house, right? This isn't a set? Like, yeah, this is a real house. I'm like, okay, does it have a basement? So then we found the basement, and it's like, all right, we'll just move stuff around. So moving the family into the basement, like Rodrigo and Marty immediately were like, that's perfect, that has the right feel. It was also scripted that it be a slow punch in on Molly's face as the thought is occurring to her, and then it would be overlapped by her voiceover going back to the train station, you know, how to kill these men that killed my family. And so that was what was on the script, that was on the page, that was our first take. As we were going in to get the wide, the establishing wide. And that moment where it's sinking in and I'm just like processing it, all I can hear is Janae Collins' infectious damn little laugh. Janae, who plays Rita, like, it's just, anybody who knows her and has spent any time around her, her laugh is just, you miss it. You hear it from a mile away. And, you know, as fate would have it, Janae is actually my flesh and blood cousin. It goes back several generations, but it's like one of our family lines that, I mean, you know, we keep pretty clean record of who we come from, both, you know, for government purposes, but, you know, just tradition in our family. So her great-great-great-great-grandma was a woman named Natawista Ixina, medicine snake woman, and her brother was my great-great-great-grandfather, Red Crow's father. And Red Crow was Kainai chief who was a signatory of Treaty 7 in Canada. So our lineage is like, you know, we don't use the term royalty, but like our family was pretty well established, a lot of leadership. Natawista actually kind of reminded me a bit of my character in First Cow. She was an Indian woman in the early 1800s with great wealth for marrying a diplomat, frontiersman, white man named Alexander Culbertson. But anyways, Janae and I had this connection that she told me when we were on set. I had no idea, because I knew her father, Rod Rondeau, was also in Kelly Reichardt's movie Meek's Cut Off. He's the Indian in Meek's Cut Off. Great stuntsman, really good actor. He's in Sterling Harjo's movies. So I always thought Janae was Crow. She is. She's half Crow. But she's also from Poplar, Montana, which is very close to the High Line. And it's like our families both made their way down to Montana around the same time. All that to say, like, Janae and I got very close because we're family. And she was a very missed presence on set when that laugh wasn't around anymore. So that, like, hearing that laugh and just the immediate thought that I'm like, you're never gonna hear that again. That's what came out. Just, like, it surprised me. Clearly it surprised the kids.
Surprised or terrified?
Yeah, I mean, surprised us all, surprised me. And then when we called cut, I heard Marty's feet just he pops up on the other side of camera, tears in his eyes, just like, that was it. That was it. We don't need to punch in. Do another one for safety. They went with the first one. But yeah, that scene, it insisted on itself, I think.
You mentioned also, you made me think about the ADR, at the train station is when we hear we hear you think evil surrounds me. And I was wondering, because there are several times during the movie where we hear your thoughts, which are very emotional beats. And I was wondering, did you know what the script was? Did you know what you would be hearing when you were performing? Anna's birth, when you're suspicious of the wasting illness is another moment where you are hearing it from somebody. And yeah, I'm just wondering, when you're at the train station and you're performing this idea that we see, that reads perfectly, that evil surrounds you, did you know what the line would be in that moment?
Yeah, I was running the lines in my head.
Okay.
That was, that was Molly's internal dialogue that I had the whole time. And like planning, I knew that it just, such a well-written script. Like, I knew that me looking at this man who's just like, I think we have a real opportunity, the tall chief's through this big thing. And it's like, my sister just doesn't have a head anymore. And you're here talking about like what kind of party we can throw with this money from her inheritance. So that whole, like, it does not do to talk to this man. I loved that on the page because right then it shows you, like, that's the heart of what that stoic Indian trope really is. Like, people have that trope, it exists. We have conversations about this now because, like, when you're around natives, we laugh. Janae is a big example of that. But when we're in community with each other, when we're in groups with each other, we're laughing. We're fun-loving people. We're expressive people. It's this idea of the stoic Indian. It comes from, in some ways, this romanticized articulation of like the European, like seeing like the dying race, and then like stoicism through like a Western perspective applied onto us, and like. Very, very William Hale, it's like the most beautiful people on this earth, but they're sickly, they're dying, It's like that's manifest destiny right there. The romanticization of us and the brutal murder of us going hand in hand, and therefore like claiming like this kind of prideful stoic nature for self. It's projected on us. And also stoicism does serve a real big purpose if there's like outsiders in the room, and particularly women. Women we're protected, we protect our knowledge. Like, a lot of times we're the ones who are making the choices for our whole community. Like, and not every tribe is the same. Not all of these constructs are the same. But by and large, like, women's societies are the ones that make the really big decisions for everybody. So women are protected the way that you protect like leadership. They're the ones who protect knowledge. So if there's like a white anthropologist around, then everybody's going to get stoic, you know. But in that one line, I was like, good, that's a real humanized way of looking at that trope. And if people are wondering why Molly's somebody of few words or wondering where this comes from, it's like, why talk to this asshole? There's no use in it. So yeah, we definitely had those lines running in my head as we were doing it. We did it in a couple of different ways. Ended up just going with the walking shot. There was one where I'm on a dolly and I'm kind of floating through, and it was just like I was just trying not to laugh the whole time. Just gliding through this, like, everybody's like jovial and happy to be there, but then all of a sudden, like, just turn it on. Anyway, yeah.
One of the things I love about this love story is the language that you learn with Leo. And I love that it is a secret language that you speak in the house. Like, for example, when the doctors come, so it becomes a very intimate language, which we understand even when there are no subtitles. This intimacy between the two of you. And some of those scenes, like when he's brushing your hair, are such tender moments. And it's such a juxtaposition as well to the, I think that's when there's the line about you'd be more likely to be convicted for killing a dog. Can you talk about that language of love? Also, you're both speaking Osage, a language which isn't yours, during the filming process.
Yeah, I mean, the very fact that Ernest Burkhart himself, not Leo, Ernest Burkhart became fluent in Osage so that he could communicate with his wife. Like, that's how Gran wrote him. That's how the community, the family talks about him. To me, in this very difficult love story that we had to untangle because it was true, you can hear it was true. You can hear from everybody that they actually loved each other. And there's evidence of that. For me, that was one of the big pieces of evidence. Not every white man who married an Osage woman went to the lengths of learning her language. Hale learned it, but learned it for a different reason. I think Hale was trying to become Osage. Another testament in the real world to this love that was somehow real and somehow lasting, even though Molly cut him completely out of her life after that trial, except to sue him for mismanaging her money and getting money back from him before she passed away. She got like 14 grand back from Ernest from when he was her guardian and did a horrible job with it. Other than that, he was out of her life. But Ernest Burkhart himself maintained a relationship with his kids for a while. He moved back to Osage County as soon as he got out of prison. He moved in with his brother Byron. They lived in a trailer until they were old men in the 1980s. Ernest was remembered in the community. He would show up to things. Community would be together and he would show up. And he would hang out in the back, not engage anybody. He was like kind of known or remembered as being a mild-mannered, mellow, quiet guy that people couldn't really figure out, except for people who knew who he was. It's that image of him sitting there just to be around Osage people, but never really integrating again, was like, there's some testament there. Like his Lizzie and Cowboy, the kids. People remember them. We were talking to elders. Cecilia Tallchief was friends with Lizzie, and she was one of our guiding lights making the film. Still is one of our guiding lights. She's an incredible woman. But she would talk about Lizzie and Cowboy being very fun-loving people. They had a close relationship with each other. There was kind of the dynamic between them where Cowboy would do something big and outlandish and, very much a man thing to do. And then Lizzie would just be like, oh, Cowboy. And just their dynamic. It was like, okay, so that dynamic was probably present in their parents. The fact that Cowboy would go pick Ernest up, he would be with a group of people and be like, well, excuse me, time to go pick up old Dynamite now, was the nickname he gave his dad. and would go pick up his dad, drive around with him, spend time with him, drop him off, make sure he was seen too. It's like when you're in the family, you're in the family, and then when you're out of it, you're out of it. So eventually, I think Cowboy stopped doing that. Later in his life, he kind of couldn't reconcile what his dad had done. And I think, you know, as it says in the book, he pieced it together that he and his mom were at his aunt's house that night, and they only came home because he had an earache. So he and his mom might have been blown up in the house too. So that was all of these little pieces of evidence, but all of these also testaments to this weird remaining love. And Ernest, until the day he died, Leo would sit with Ernest and Byron's niece, Kaylin, and she would talk about how her uncles every Christmas would drink their eggnog, get drunk, and start talking about those days. Byron would brag about it, would talk about the murder of Anna Brown. Ernest would get real somber. Byron said anything against Molly, Ernest would get so mad. It's like she said it's the only time she was scared of him is when somebody brought up Molly in a bad way or suggested that he didn't love her. And, you know, Leo and I talked about is like, was that authentic, or is that a guilty man that's like been sitting with his guilt so long? It's like he's conflated this love to be something bigger than it was. But yeah, it was all there. It was all stuff that we had to crack into and had to somehow make happen. And I remember, even though early on we shot a lot of our early scenes, including the clip that was played with the, you know, was he murdered or did he kill himself? That was day 3 of filming. We had to move that up because of a location issue further down the line. So that scene, that day, we shot about 6, 7, 8 different ways, because we hadn't cracked what their relationship was yet. You know, different levels of suspicion, different levels of complicity, all of it. And what worked, again, that was the first or second take. Because while we were, even though it didn't make sense to us to hear that this love story was real, something about seeing it playing out, you feel it. You're weirdly rooting for it. Even though you're seeing what's happening behind the scenes. And like all of that really clicked for me when my language teacher gave me in our language lessons, because I wanted to hear Osage enough so that I could take like my Blackfeet dialect out of any indigenous language impulses I would have. I'm not fluent in Blackfeet, but it's the only language that I can, you know, get my mouth around the phonemes and like learn the cadence and pick up fairly quickly because I grew up hearing it, grew up around it. Osage was so foreign when I was first hearing it. So when I was listening to these stories my language teacher was telling me, he kept telling me trickster stories. Kept specifically about Coyote, and I kept hearing Ernest, because that's what it is when you hear these trickster stories. The trickster is the main character. You're kind of weirdly rooting for them, but the whole time you're like, wait, that's really bad what they're doing. But they're really funny. You know, it's, they're cautionary tales. Trickster stories teach you how not to be. And then suddenly, like, one, it gave Molly maybe not a blind spot, but an understanding of Ernest and his nature a bit. And maybe enough of a blind spot that Ernest could hide in it. She felt like she had him figured out. She felt like he wasn't capable of it. And I think that became even more evidence when you see very clearly his love of his kids. And the, you know, the enduring relationship he had with Cowboy was a big example of that. So yeah, when I finally watched it, when I got to see it, I texted Leo immediately. I'm like, oh my God, we did it. How did we do that?
It's completely believable. I think you see those blind spots, and I think that is what makes it believable. You spoke earlier in the conversation about the craft of acting and this idea of inside out and outside in. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the physicality, because I think one of the most extraordinary things about this performance, and I'd love to see your copy of the script, is how you thought about the poisoning, the addiction, you know, the physical effects of what he was giving her as you go through all of the scenes and then go through rehab. It's just this incredible physical journey.
I mean, you said it. It's nobody really knew what was in Molly's poison, but the family, her grandchildren, particularly her grandson Billy, told us that they pretty much figured out it was along with her insulin, which was making her better. Side note, Molly was indeed one of the first 5 people in the world to get insulin, so nobody knew what the effects of it were. It was totally plausible that that could have been making her as sick as she was. The cocktail being put in by the Shawn brothers was most likely arsenic and morphine. So arsenic, clearly to do the dirty job. Morphine to probably mask the feeling of her symptoms so that she trusted it and would keep taking it, but also the side effect of addiction. So that was a big clue for me as to how to play that last chapter. I mean, reading about morphine and how it shifts with people who are addicts, my first job professionally was playing a morphine addict in To Kill a Mockingbird. I played Mrs. Dubose. Yeah. Anyway, 22-year-old playing a 90-year-old morphine addict.
I noticed you played a lot of smokers too. I saw that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But yeah, the morphine was a big clue for me on, okay, so Molly has an addiction she's unaware of. It's very easy to transfer, and anybody who's been in a horrible relationship, it's like a drug. And when you're out of it, it does feel like withdrawal. You'll do anything to stay in it. So having that element, but also when Ernest is giving her the medicine, it's what makes things feel kind of okay for a minute. And then the longer he's away, the worse it gets, and then he's there and it's okay. So at that point, when her subconscious mind is placing suspicion where it belongs, I mean, you see, whether you want to see it as a subconscious thing, as a spiritual visit, whatever it is, when you see the owl, this messenger that death is coming or death is near, walk in, and then it's Ernest, there's some message there that her upbringing is telling her. But there's that medicine that makes it better. And then the recovery process, when the arsenic was out of the equation, unfortunately, when the morphine was taken out of the equation, the doctor prescribed her heroin. So that was something Molly had to deal with in her last years of her life, according to the community. But it was prescribed. It was the 20s. Well, Molly, for me, that really helped with those final scenes, because immediately, they talk about in Reichardt how remarkably fast her rebound was. And when it was just insulin in her system, how quickly she recovered from it. And as she's essentially sobering up, and her subconscious mind is not being hijacked by substance, by being poisoned to death, when the pieces are falling together, when her suspicions that were being directed more toward Hale than they were Ernest were starting to come to light more. I'm hesitant to give away too much of what my internal process was during the last chapter, because it was very important to Marty that we maintain, in reference to The Heiress by William Wyler, which was a big film reference for Molly. At the end of this manipulated love story in William Wyler's piece, you see Montgomery Cliff, or you hear him outside of Olivia de Havilland's mansion, trying to get her back. He's basically swept her off her feet for her inheritance, for her money, and then he took off and left her brokenhearted. And then years later, he comes back around, ostensibly because the money's run out, and you see her like a reconstructed woman. You're kind of hanging on, wondering if she's going to open the door to him again or not. In the very last instant, she locks it and goes up the stairs, and that's the end of the film. She's done with him. But Marty wanted to maintain that feeling of right up until that lock is locked, you think she might open the door to him. I had my own process, my own thoughts with all of it, but a lot of it had to do with, in this long sort of separation from Ernest, when the trial's going on, Molly's gaining a lot back. She's also breaking an addiction to him. So, like, the use of the cigarette in the first scene with Ernest and Molly as being a casual thing to really needing that cigarette to just get through the day, because I know a lot of people in recovery just are chain smokers. The feeling of him, and letting that genuine, authentic feeling of there's still some kind of love there, letting that live in the realm of addiction in a way. But also, there was love there. There was a family there. There was this sense that in this fantasy life that I believed but doesn't actually exist, we're happy over there. But that's not what's really here. And I think that's also a really good analogy for what addiction is, for somebody who's breaking a cycle of addiction. It's a fantasy. Everything that felt right and made you feel good with it was what was drawing your life from you, and it never really existed. So, yeah.
I think you described that last scene perfectly with that reference. The fact that she gives him this final opportunity is incredible, when she asks him what he gave her and he just can't tell the truth. I want to just end on a lighter note. And the sisters, the wedding scene is absolutely fantastic, and the picnic scene is just where we really get to revel and have fun and see their personalities. And so can you talk about creating that revelry with the sisters?
Yeah, that scene particularly, we can take full responsibility for. We wrote it together. The four of us are all only children, so I think the thing about only children is when you make friends, they almost become siblings, like you claim them in a way. So we were working on our individual tracks, our individual characters, and then when it came time to really start working together to make sure we had the fluidity of the Osage in the scene together, we were finding, and our language teachers were finding, there were some lines that conceptually weren't translating into Osage. They reemerged later. The particular line in question was Molly says he has these devilish blue eyes. And they're like, we can't translate that. So at that point, this introduction of these trickster stories of Shomikasi came in, and it was like, that made sense. It was like, this trickster, it's like, nah, he's not that. He's Coyote. Meaning the trickster figure, not the animal. But that kind of was the springboard for all of us to then rewrite our lines, because the other sisters, they were there and it moved the scene to being like, essentially driving toward this squashing of suspicion or this acceptance. Like, yeah, of course he wants money. Why wouldn't he want money? But it was a really nice opportunity for all of us who had been developing our characters, and particularly for the other sisters. I knew I had the rest of the film to ride Molly out, so I hung back in that scene a bit. And when we all sat down together, Marty talked about the tone he wanted in that scene. It's like, to show what the family dynamic is. And I think Marty knew that it wasn't really present in the lines when the lines were all so focused on just Ernest and this weird suspicion, and they were very short. And so yeah, we got the chance to sit down and talk about who our characters were, what we wanted to show. Jillian Dion just wanted to, because she's the youngest sister, because we talked about together collectively, all of us, even though you can cast suspicion as well on Bill Smith, the man who marries both sisters, which is actually not uncommon. It was that was in an improvisation once that didn't survive the cut of the film, but the idea of him marrying one sister who dies and then the other, I have a great-grandparent whose wife passed away, and he married her sister and took care of all of their kids. It was just kind of practice at that time, especially that was my Nez family in the 1940s, so it made sense. It wouldn't have rose suspicion. But yeah, Jillian and Janae were talking about and me too, it's like, what dignity do our characters have if we're just falling in love with these men who don't actually love us, who are just using us for our money? It's like, so it was an opportunity for Jillian to plant that seed in, that it's like, oh, okay, they've got a good sex life, that there's a reason for her to be in that marriage. stage. That she's got a little bit of, even though she's very diminished and she's not feeling well and she's got this wasting illness just pulling her down from the inside out, she's still a Native woman with a sense of levity. And like sisters getting together, like it's teasing. Like we love each other and we tease each other. That's what it is to be in Indian country too. If you're not being teased, it probably means we don't like you. So it was just a really nice opportunity to do that, to bring in shades of all of us, this dynamic that also is kind of established in the birth order of Osage families. Like there's personalities almost prescribed to you based upon the order you're born in. The oldest girl, Anna, has the right to wear red. The oldest girl, Mina, is the Osage name for the firstborn girl. All the light shines on her. All the accolades shine on her. She can do no wrong. The second-born, it's her responsibility to take care of everybody, to take care of her parents, to help raise her younger siblings, to take care of the house, to be a little bit more humble and responsible. And then that kind of continues on down the birth order. And then, of course, the baby, just everybody revolves around the baby. But, and that was Minnie. So, like, we all as a sistership found a lot of our dynamic in our relationship with her because she's the first one that we all lose, and we all lose together. Yeah, it's a short scene. I would love more of it. But it was so rich, and it was such a display of the hard work that everybody'd put in talking to the community about who are Osage women. What were we like because of this birth order? What were women at this time like? Anna getting a chance to illustrate a woman embracing modernity a bit, and then Molly being like so planted and being traditional, and just the way that plays out in one generation. It breaks a lot of stereotypes, that scene. You could argue that Molly is like a stoic Indian, but then you have her boisterous sisters, It's like all of it.
Your performance is absolutely beautifully crafted. Thank you for sharing it with us and so much time this evening. Thank you so much, Lily.
Sorry for keeping you all.